Alright, so we're back for another week of day trading, and I'm not gonna lie, this was a pretty tough week. There were definitely some solid opportunities to bank, but I also made a few mistakes along the way, which we'll see as we go through the trades. And every week I feel like I'm just learning more about myself as a trader, and even though the process can be uncomfortable at times, that's really how growth happens. So let's just not overthink it, let's jump straight into the trades. Alright guys, so coming into the day, price action wasn't the cleanest. We did break through NWOG though, so I was overall leaning more bullish, especially after we also broke through this hourly imbalance here. And price was still respecting this 4-hour order block as well, so that's when my long buy started to form. And the only thing that was kind of holding me back was this 1-hour order block overhead, which was still doing a decent job at keeping price down. And we also had a pretty large displacement candle earlier, followed by a much slower crawl higher. So that's something that I was keeping in mind. There was definitely still a chance we could manipulate these highs and then push lower, so I wasn't going to rush anything. And dropping down to the lower time frames, things were starting to look a bit more bullish. We had a few nice confluences lining up, and we also formed a protected low, which made me expect price to continue higher. The main target for me was this prominent high up here, and I was looking to see that get swept. And if price ended up taking the target before I had an entry, I would have been open for a potential reversal, since the bullish confluences below still hadn't been fully rebalanced. And that said, I was happy to stay patient and only get involved if price actually confirmed the move. And as price developed, we ended up getting a retrace into this 5-minute fair value gap, which was just sitting above the 15 and 5-minute order block that I marked out earlier. Price consolidated a bit in that area, and then we got some really clean displacement higher, and that displacement is what gave me the green light to enter. And now you might be thinking, isn't that a bit early? You know, why did you enter before price retested your key levels? And for me, the reason was narrative. And we still had that 4-hour and 1-hour imbalance backing up the move, and volume was also stepping in nicely. And we also had a prominent unswept LRL above price acting as a magnet. On top of that, the 1-minute displacement was pretty aggressive, so I was confident that the orders were likely to keep running. And price did exactly that for a bit. We stalled briefly, but then we got that clean push higher, which secured a nice win for the day. And overall, I am pretty happy with how I traded today. At first, I thought I might not even get a setup, but after seeing how price reacted to the more recent imbalances and then getting that displacement, I was able to take the trade without hesitating. That's something that I want to keep working on though, balancing the higher time frame narrative with what price is actually doing in the moment. But yeah, nice quick day today, nothing too crazy. Alright, so coming into the day, I was feeling pretty bullish overall. We still had this 4-hour imbalance sitting below price, which hasn't been filled yet, but on the 1-hour time frame, we were getting some really clean displacement higher, and we also had this hourly order block with a tap into the discount zone, which helped support that long bias. And for targets, I was mainly looking towards the prominent low resistance liquidity above price, pretty much the same as yesterday. And dropping down to the lower time frames, price was giving us some decent confluences and currently retesting them. What really stood out to me was how much low resistance liquidity was being built during this slow crawl lower. So for me, the idea was pretty simple. If we got displacement higher on the lower time frame, something like a 5-minute inverse, then I'd be happy to take the long with confidence. At the same time, I was also aware of the equal low sitting below price, so I knew that there was still a possibility of a push lower to take out those. And as price continued to develop, we ended up getting a push deeper into the bullish confluences here. I still thought we could displace higher, but I was also paying attention to some bearish lower time frame confluences starting to form, along with a wick sweep of a high. With those equal lows looking like a really clean target, I stayed open for a short if price gave me the confirmation. And after waiting a bit, buyers weren't really stepping in, volume was pretty light, and then we got a large displacement candle lower. And that displacement is what got me into the short, targeting those equal lows. Price then immediately snapped back higher with the displacement I was originally waiting for, and I ended up getting stopped out pretty quickly. And even though this one didn't work out, I am still really happy with how I traded today. I wasn't married to a single bias, and I actually let price tell me what it wanted to do. I took into account the opposing confluences, the market structure, and adjusted my idea based on what was developing in real time. And if I had forced the original long idea, I would have gotten wicked out really bad. So overall, I am happy with the progress, even if it wasn't what I wanted. The results weren't great, but sticking to the process matters way more. Alright, so coming to today, things were looking pretty bullish overall. Price was retesting into some higher time frame bullish confluences, specifically this 4-hour and 1-hour fair value gap. And we also had some low resistance strolls on liquidity sitting on both sides of price, which gave a bit of room for manipulation. And based on the structure, my main idea was that we could see a push low first, taking out the relative lows and tapping into the 4-hour imbalance before getting a clean move higher. And dropping down to the lower time frames, we also had some nice bullish confluences lining up. Price was retesting into this 15-minute and 5-minute order block, which line up pretty pretty well with those higher time frame levels from earlier. And we had already seen some internal forms of manipulation, so I was keeping that in mind in case we suddenly got a displacement higher. And as price developed, we did get some displacement lower to manipulate the lows. That displacement was a little stronger than I would have liked, but at the time I was still open to the long idea, especially after we formed a clean bullish SMT. So from there, all I wanted to see was confirmation on the lower time frame. Then after waiting a bit longer, we finally got that displacement higher with a solid body form closing past the wick, and that's what got me into this trade. And pretty much straight away, this trade went into drawdown, price pushed lower again, and the initial displacement just wasn't strong enough to support the move, and we ended up dumping straight to my stop loss. Definitely another frustrating result today, but looking back at it calmly, there were a few clear takeaways. I still think that the confluences themselves were strong and the targets made sense. That said, the manipulation to the downside was probably a bit too aggressive. Even though we had an SMT, it still would have been cleaner to see a proper wick sweep of the lows instead. And I also could have waited for a 5-minute inverse to form, especially since the 5-minute structure was still bearish at the time. So while the idea itself was solid, my execution could have been a lot more patient. So going forward, I just want to wait for some clearer confirmation before getting involved. And yeah, it's just all part of the process, another lesson learned today, and I'll just keep working on improving the quality and we'll come back stronger. Alright, so looking at today's price action, we were still leading bullish overall. We had some clean higher time frame imbalances that price was retesting into, and we also got a wick sweep off the lows, which helped confirm that narrative. On top of that, we also had a pretty big pocket of low resistance liquidity sitting above price, so that was my main upside target coming into the session. And dropping down to the lower time frames, we also had some solid bullish confluences forming. Taking yesterday's lesson into account, I really want to see a proper shift in market structure before committing to the long bias, and we did get that as we saw a 5-minute shift higher along with a 15-minute inverse to valley gap form and get retested. And after that confirmation, my focus was just on letting price continue to retrace a bit more before looking for a continuation on the lower time frame. And as price developed, we actually got a pretty strong displacement lower, which isn't ideal in the situation. We did form a 5-minute imbalance above price, and I initially wanted to see that get displaced through to confirm the longs, and instead price continued to displace lower, which started putting the sells on my radar. And at that point, we had the confluences lined up and the larger displacement candle lower that gave extra confidence. And during market open, we displaced lower again. We wicked into the 5-minute fair value gap, and that confirmed the continuation to the downside, and that's where I entered targeting a clean 1-to-1. And this trade played out pretty quickly, with price pushed lower almost immediately and took out this prominent drawn liquidity to the sell side, and I moved my stop to break even at that point, and we did form a bit of a wick on the 5-minute, but price held structure and continued pushing lower. That move secured a clean dub for today, and overall I am really happy with how I performed today. I consciously applied yesterday's lesson of being more patient, and it made a big difference. Normally I would have entered early off of a 1-minute wick after the 5-minute fair value gap tap, and this time I waited for proper displacement lower before getting involved, and had I jumped in early, I would have been stopped out before price actually ran to the target. So this was a really clean example of letting price confirm the idea instead of forcing the trade. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. I'm just going to keep maintaining this patience and continue waiting for clear displacement and trend alignment moving forward. Alright, so coming to the last day of the week, we actually got some pretty clean displacement lower during pre-market. We had some solid bearish confluences backing that up, specifically this 4-hour and 1-hour order block, and price had also traded into the premium of this range, and because of that, I was definitely leaning towards a continuation lower. That being said, I was also aware of some bullish indications like the strong displacement higher earlier in the session, which created a few inverse imbalances, so overall I was leaning sell side but staying open-minded. And dropping down to the lower time frames, things weren't super clean, as we had some bullish signals like a wick sweep of the low and low resistance to liquidity sitting above. Price was also retesting into this 5-minute order block. At the same time though, we also had a 15-minute inverse fair value gap forming to the downside. So at this point, my plan was pretty simple. Either just wait for a clean shift lower to confirm the sell side continuation, or let price push higher with structure to back up the long. Early on, volume was pretty dead. Price was struggling to commit to either direction, so I just stayed patient and let it develop. After some time, we did get a nice SMT and price push higher with a body close past the 5-minute high, and based on that confirmation, I decided to take the setup. And this trade ended up dragging on for quite a while. Initially displaced lower to tap a newly formed 5-minute imbalance, and then we got a shift higher, which I thought might be the move to the upside. Instead, price continued pushing lower, and we stalled for a long time. Had a few really close calls, and although a bullish SMT was still holding, the trade just wasn't clean. And at that point, I knew that this wasn't something that I wanted to force, and after a pretty stressful hold, I ended up getting taken out at break even. And looking back, I do think I rushed this one. Waiting for the 5-minute shift was the right idea, but if I was more aware of the context, I would have noticed that volume volume just wasn't there, and because of that it would have been cleaner to wait for a proper retrace into the 5-minute imbalance instead of entering off the initial push. And this trade took a bigger mental toll than it should have, and that's a good reminder that even break-even trades can be expensive if the setup isn't clean. So it's definitely something that I'll keep working on, and coming into next week I'm going to be more selective and more patient. I know the execution is there, it's just about polishing these finer details. Alright guys, that's gonna wrap up the trades for this week. Definitely a stressful one. Price didn't really run the way I wanted, and I could feel myself rushing at times. And looking back, I did learn a lot though, especially about patience and not forcing things just because I wanted results faster. At the end of the day, I know this is a long-term game. It's about stacking and protecting wins over time, not trying to rush the process. There were a couple of trades like Friday where the confluences were there, but the structure really just wasn't strong enough to justify the entry. And waiting for a cleaner retest would have been the better play, and that's something that I'll be more mindful going into next week. So yeah, just focusing on taking things at my own pace, trusting the model, and not feeling the need to rush anything. And that's gonna be it for this week. So if you guys are interested, feel free to check out the Discord. It's just a chill space for everybody to talk, learn, and grow together. I appreciate you guys as always. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.